Welcome to my messy studio, everyone. My name is Mark, and I'm an artist and an art professor. And in this video, I'd like to share with you an excerpt from my downloadable class called Drawing People in Pen and Watercolor, which is available for purchase through Vimeo. Do you dream of sitting at a cafe with a little sketchbook drawing the people around you, but don't know how to go about it? Well, this is one of my favorite things to do, at least it was in my younger days when I had time, but it's still one of my favorite subjects to teach to others. So, this information-packed 4.5-hour class covers much of what you need to know to get started. The class is divided into 8 chapters, covering such topics as the sketching process, human figure proportions, inking, drawing clothing, mixing skin tones, and working in different time frames, from longer, detailed work to quick sketches. All demonstrations are done in real time with extensive explanations and are accompanied by the original reference images. This class will be valuable not only to those who wish to while away the hours in coffee shops, but also to any beginning fine artist or illustrator who wants to improve this all-important skill. Please enjoy this 20-minute excerpt from my class, and if you're interested in purchasing it, I'll leave a link for you in the description section. Thanks for watching, and see you back in my messy studio very soon. Bye-bye. Yeah, the good thing about the Armature is that it allows you to preview your drawing. So if you see that something's incorrect, right, you can shift it. You can move it around. Don't dig in, meaning that if you see some kind of mistake in your Armature, which is going to happen, obviously, the more complicated the pose is, right, the more that's likely to happen. Don't keep drawing, right? Fix the Armature. Don't keep moving forward. Fix the Armature, right? Take the time to get the Armature right before moving to the next stage. Making mistakes is natural, and the main difference, however, between a professional artist, or a proficient artist, let's put it this way, and the student is that the professional will stop themselves before they're fully committed to making the mistake, before they're too dug in and they can't dig themselves out anymore. Okay, so there needs to be more compression this way. Let's see, this needs to be a little bit longer. Bring that down a little bit. Bring that down a little bit. Okay, a little bit more complicated pose this time. A little bit more shifting and moving things around was required, but hopefully, I got things right. So again, the idea is that as you're training yourself to do this, that you carefully select poses with increasing difficulty. Start off with standing poses, then little by little, the initial poses should be from the front, should have relatively simple poses to them. Then you can start thinking about doing seated poses, poses with foreshortening, and then little by little increase the difficulty where you're doing poses that are really complicated. I suspect most of you that have purchased this video are learning on your own. And when you do that, you have to be your own coach, meaning you have to be your own trainer, right? The trainer, I keep using fitness analogies, I don't know why, but the trainer's responsibility is to keep you honest, number one. So if you're taking shortcuts in the exercise, the trainer tells you, no, slow down, or you're doing this sloppily. But also to increase the weight, increase the difficulty. That's going to be the complicated thing for some of you, right? So when you're choosing poses, try to, as much as possible, slowly, progressively increase the complication of the pose. Don't jump immediately to these complicated foreshortened poses where you have lean, right? Stay with the standing poses a little bit until you're comfortable, and then little by little increase the complexity. Again, you have to be your own trainer. If you very early on, due to impatience, jump to some very, very complicated pose, you're going to get frustrated. right? Just like somebody that isn't used to handling the weight might get frustrated because they can't lift the weight as many times as they want. All right, so be your own trainer, be your own advocate, and then little by little increase the complexity of your training. And then don't spend too much time on these, right? Keep these relatively small. Don't focus too much on detail at this stage. Again, the focus here, you have a limited objective. You're focused just on getting the armature right and putting in just enough contour so that you can tell whether you've done it correctly or not. And then moving on. This is a kind of an important lesson that I learned from Proko. I don't know if you're familiar with his series of art instructional videos. He's a institution at this point. But one thing he said in one of his earlier videos is that the main advantage of doing shorter poses, quicker poses, gestures, is that it allows you to fail faster. Meaning that you make a mistake, you learn from that mistake, and then you try the exercise again and hopefully eliminate the error. If you can do those very quickly, if you can go through a few drawings quickly, that allows you to learn from your mistakes faster. So there are a lot of benefits to doing longer drawings, and a big part of my training was doing lots of very long drawings, 8 hours, 10 hours. We spent months on drawings. It's part of the academic system under which I was trained. And there's a lot of benefit to that, to really slowing down. But there's also a lot of benefit to these kinds of quick drawings where you're not focused on detail. You have a limited objective. Right, you can see I didn't push this leg out quite enough. And actually, I think I made this model a little bit thinner than I needed to. But I think that's fairly close. So my point is that shorter drawings like this, don't make them too short. I wouldn't do 5 minutes. I would spend, look, it depends, right? 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes, just getting the basics, putting down the armature, and then putting in the contours carefully to see whether the armature is done correctly or not, and then either redoing it if it's incorrect, making corrections, and moving on to the next pose. Line entirely. If this was purely line, then that might call for perhaps a slightly different approach. But the fact is, we have to anticipate that we're going to add wash to this. You don't need to complete your drawing entirely with the ink. We need to leave room for the watercolor washes to do their magic as well. So don't seal off your drawing. You don't need to complete your drawing in the pen and ink stage. Right? Not everything has to be perfectly complete. Okay, so here we have the foulard, and the lines here are going to be smoother. And then maybe for the skin, I'm going to make the lines a little bit lighter. Right, so emphasize the smoothness of the textures here. A variety of different line quality, a variety of different texture gives the drawing more variety, more visual interest, which is what we're looking for. Something I can exaggerate is perhaps the intensity of this gentleman's facial expression. He's really concentrating here, lost in his work. So I can furrow the brow even more, introduce a little bit more of a frown. So he's like straining in concentration here. Okay, for the hair, as opposed to putting down one single line, I'm going to emphasize the hairiness of the texture here and put in a contour that's composed of a bunch of lines as opposed to one single line. Again, where texture should be most visible is at the edges. Right, that's where you see it most. So take a little bit extra time to emphasize the texture at the edges. Okay, so here we have the roughness of the jacket. The roughness of the jacket. The line quality here needs to be a little bit thinner. I'm showing overlap here. This line here is going to be some of the softest lines I put in the drawing. Why? Because they're far away. And then we have the hand. By the way, not everything has to have the same degree of detail. So the clothing can have less detail if you want. Think about your area of focus. Where do you want people to look most? The face, maybe the hands. Those areas could have a little bit more tightly rendered parts to them. So maybe for the hands, I'm going to spend a little bit more time rendering the detail, because that's one of the areas where perhaps I want people to look more. So I'm going to try to emphasize the smoothness of the hands, contrast them with the roughness of the clothing. And slow down here a little bit. Those little areas where there's a little bit more detail are areas where the viewer will slow down as well. The viewer's eyes are going to slow down. As one really important rule, one simple rule, is to be generous with the detail. Right? Give the viewer lots of stuff to look over. And if you want, introduce detail that's not even there. So for example, I can introduce maybe an additional pen or two in his pocket, for example, right? Again, just to add additional visual interest. A good drawing should have many gifts. It should reveal many things in it. It should attract your attention from a distance, so it needs to have decent contrast, a variety of different colors, and then it should reward further viewing. Right? So as you examine details, the viewer should be rewarded for that additional examination. Interfere with each task, the task of each medium. If I want to get a little more elaborate, depends how much time I have, I can introduce some cooler colors. So perhaps around the upper part of the mouth, right, the skin tone's going a little more blue. But again, for a sketch, this is a fairly convincing degree of complexity. Let's go a little bit redder around the cheeks. Just a little tiny bit, right? There's a few spots where it might go a little bit warmer. Like so. All right, let's do another head using the same strategy. So we're going to start off with the skin tone. In this case, the skin tone is a little more saturated because our light source is stronger. Here we have direct sunlight probably. And also the skin tone is a little bit darker and has a little bit more orange in it, a little more yellow. So we're going to start off with burnt sienna as a base tone, and then we're going to throw a little bit of yellow ochre into it. All right, so let's put this down and see what that looks like. So we're just going to wash over the entire face with it, even the parts that are in shadow. We'll start off with a single color. While this wash is still wet, we're going to take the opportunity to complicate the color a little bit. So I noticed that on the shadow side, the color, the reflected color here, is a little bit warmer and also a little bit darker. So we're going to throw in a slightly stronger color here, maybe inside the glasses as well. Right, just to make the color a little bit richer. And then also complicate it a little bit here. So we have perhaps some colors that are a little bit more saturated, a little bit warmer. In the ear, on the nose, here as well. Okay, so let's wait for this wash to dry a little bit, and then we're going to apply this shadow color. By the way, one great way of getting lighter values is to simply sop up some of the wash while it's still wet. So here's a very quick way of creating softer highlights. Not sharp highlights like we isolated here, but softer highlights. Just use a little paper towel and lift off a little bit of that wash. Okay, so let's wait for this to dry. Okay, hopefully this wash is dry enough that we can start putting in shadows. Let's put in a shadow. So again, starting with burnt sienna, a little bit of cobalt blue. In this case, we're dealing with a warmer shadow. We're sort of indoors, right? So the light being reflected back into the shadow is warmer. And let's start putting in a little bit of shadow here. Again, the good thing about the mixture I'm using is that it's on the lighter side. Right, that's going to prevent the shadow from going too dark and obfuscating, covering up all of the hard work I did with the lines. Okay. Alright, and one thing I can do to get back those reflected lights is to dry off my brush and lift off a little bit to recover some of those warm reflected lights that I lost when I put in the shadow. A lot of manipulation can be done while the washes are drying. Take advantage of that. Right? It's one of the easiest ways to manipulate the paint, to adjust things. Acts almost like an eraser. And this is really where the better quality brushes really help. They're more absorbent, they pick up washes more effectively. Okay, so we're going to wait for this wash to dry. Or actually, we don't necessarily have to. So long as the washes are wet, we can drop in some values, drop in a little bit of additional shadow. So here we have a little bit of a darker value and this core shadow that runs across the face here that gives the sense that we're dealing with a really sharp light. Let's soften the edges here. Okay, so for a sketch, this is actually a fairly decent amount of detail. Again, we are strategizing for working fast. Situations where the model is moving, where we don't have a lot of time to complete our drawing. Keep the skin tone simple, allow the pen to do the work of putting in the details, the textures, right? Let the pen do as much of the work as possible. And keep the watercoloring stage simple. Like so. Here is some other important watercolor advice when dealing with things other than skin tone. Clothing, background, all that kind of stuff. Keep the color mixtures simple and keep them light. Most important thing is that your watercolors, particularly in the shadows, should not overwhelm your line work. It should be light enough so... And since we need a sharp edge here, I'm not going to go directly into the jacket. I don't want this color to leak into the color of the scarf. So let's keep working our way down and put in the gray of the pants. So the gray of the pants is going to be slightly warmer, right? I'm always kind of comparing grays against neutral, right? If I was looking at a completely neutral gray color, what would be the difference? Okay, well this color is a little more yellow, so I'm going to drop a little more yellow ochre into it. In fact, maybe I'm imagining things, but it almost has like a greenish, slightly really pale, subtle greenish tint to it. Okay, so let's put it down. And then again, while this is still wet, I can create little highlights. Right? This requires a dry paper towel. Right, so here, for example, I can lift up a little bit, right, while the wash is still wet. Maybe I waited a little bit too long. No, it's working a little tiny bit. Really, for this, you need to have the paper towel ready to sop up your washes. Okay. All right, for the shoes. Okay, so we have lighter gray shoelaces. Again, any opportunity to leave things white is not a bad thing. So maybe I'll leave the shoelaces white. But we have a different kind of gray. Not only is it darker, right? But what is the difference in color? It's probably a little bit more green. A little more green. So think kind of monotone, monochrome gray. Ask yourself, what is the difference between the color you're seeing and that gray? A little darker, a little more green. And then maybe I'll leave the shoelaces alone. Again, for a sketch, little bits of white, good for the drawing. Okay, I just added way too much yellow, but okay. Not too bad. Okay, so I think we're ready to do the jacket. These small palettes, the one source of irritation is that you constantly have to be cleaning your mixing area. Okay, so let's mix up brown. So this is my burnt sienna, a little bit of cobalt blue, a little more burnt sienna. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, not too bad for the lighter value. Okay, let's do it. I'm gonna leave those invented fountain pens alone. Again, while the wash is still wet, this is a good time to go in and sop up some of those lighter values. So we can pick out a few details here and there that go a little bit lighter. Really quick way of suggesting lighter values when you're sketching. And by the way, this also works in pure watercolor, this kind of stuff. Okay, there's the jacket. Okay, while this is drying, let's put in the hair. Again, it's a different kind of gray, right? So we need a color that is perhaps a little bit lighter, and it's a little bit cooler, a little bit more blue than the other gray, which is here. Right, so here we might leave a few areas of white. Again, for sketching, leaving things white is a good thing. I'd say, look, that's good general advice. I think a lot of painters, especially when they're inventing colors, forget the fact that white is also a color. And having white